The $5 ranch. The deal that seemed too good. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Jake Morrison's weathered face as he dismounted his horse outside the ramshackle land office in Tombstone. Dust swirled around his boots, and the familiar weight of his Colt .45 pressed against his hip, a reminder of the harsh realities of frontier life. Jake had been drifting for months, ever since losing his cattle ranch in Texas to a combination of drought and debt. At 32, he was tired of running, tired of sleeping under the stars with nothing but his horse and his dreams for company. The land office was little more than a wooden shack with a crooked sign that read Territorial Land Sales H. Wickham, Agent. Jake pushed through the creaky door, his spurs jingling against the floorboards. Behind a desk cluttered with maps and legal documents sat a thin man with nervous eyes and ink-stained fingers. Harold Wickham looked up from his ledger, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "What can I do for you, stranger?" Wickham asked, his voice carrying the nasal twang of an eastern city dweller who'd never quite adapted to the frontier. "I'm looking for land," Jake said simply, removing his hat and running his fingers through his dark hair. "Something I can build a life on. Heard tell there might be opportunities out here for a man willing to work hard." Wickham's eyes lit up with the gleam of a man who saw opportunity. He shuffled through a stack of papers before pulling out a particular document. "Funny you should ask. I've got a piece of property that just came available. Beautiful spread about 20 miles north of here near the Dragoon Mountains. Previous owner, well, let's just say he had to leave town in a hurry." Jake leaned forward, interested despite himself. "What kind of spread we talking about?" 500 acres of prime grazing land with a creek running right through the middle of it. There's even a small cabin and a barn already built. The thing is," Wickham paused dramatically, "the territorial government needs to move this property fast. They're willing to let it go for just $5. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the small leather pouch where he kept his remaining money. $5 was almost everything he had left, but it was also an impossibly good deal. In Texas, 500 acres of good land would cost a man several $100s if not more. "What's the catch?" Jake asked suspiciously. "Nobody sells good land for $5 unless there's something wrong with it." Wickham waved his hand dismissively. "No catch at all. The territorial government just wants to see the land developed, settled by good honest folk. They figure a working ranch is better than empty land even if they don't make much profit on the sale." Jake studied the man's face, looking for signs of deception. Wickham met his gaze steadily, though there was something in his eyes that Jake couldn't quite read. After a long moment, Jake reached into his pouch and counted out $5 placing them on the desk. "I'll take it," he said. Wickham quickly prepared the deed, his pen scratching across the paper with unusual haste. "Just sign here, Mr. Morrison." "Jake Morrison." "Excellent, Mr. Morrison. Sign here and the land is yours." Wickham blotted the ink and handed Jake the deed. "I'd recommend you head out there soon. Get yourself established before winter sets in." Jake folded the deed carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. "Much obliged, Mr. Wickham. You mind telling me the name of the previous owner?" For just a moment Wickham's composure slipped. "Fellow named Rodriguez. Miguel Rodriguez. Like I said, he had to leave town quickly. Family troubles, you understand." Jake nodded, though something in Wickham's tone suggested there was more to the story. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and headed for the door. As he stepped back into the blazing Arizona sunshine, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. 500 acres of his own land, it seemed too good to be true. He spent the rest of the day gathering supplies: coffee, beans, salt pork, ammunition, and basic tools. The general store owner, a grizzled old-timer named Pete, raised an eyebrow when Jake mentioned his destination. "The old Rodriguez place?" Pete asked, stroking his gray beard. "You sure about that, son? That land's got a history." "What kind of history?" Jake asked, but Pete just shook his head and went back to weighing out Jake's coffee beans. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake loaded his supplies onto his horse and prepared to ride north. He had a deed in his pocket and hope in his heart. What more did a man need to start over? The girl named Bella. The ride to his new property took Jake the better part of the next day. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, with towering saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the backdrop of distant mountains. As he followed the rough trail north, Jake found himself thinking about the future. He could see it all in his mind: cattle grazing in green pastures, a proper house to replace the cabin, maybe even a family someday. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Jake crested a small hill and saw his new home spread out before him. The sight took his breath away. A clear creek meandered through a valley dotted with cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. The grass was greener than he'd expected, and he could see why this would make excellent grazing land. In the distance, nestled against a grove of trees, stood a small adobe cabin with a wooden barn nearby. Jake urged his horse down the hill, eager to explore his new domain. As he drew closer to the cabin, however, he noticed something that made him rein in his mount. Smoke was rising from the chimney and a horse was tethered near the front door. Someone was living in his cabin. His hand moved instinctively to his gun as he approached cautiously. The door of the cabin opened, and a figure stepped out onto the small porch. Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with long black hair that caught the golden light of the setting sun. She was beautiful in a way that seemed to belong to this wild land, strong and graceful, with dark eyes that held both warmth and steel. "That's far enough, stranger," she called out, and Jake noticed she held a rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. "State your business." Jake raised his hands slowly, keeping them visible. "Name's Jake Morrison, miss. I don't want any trouble. I just bought this land from the territorial office in Tombstone. Got the deed right here in my pocket." The young woman's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or disbelief. "You bought this land? From who?" "Fellow named Wickham. Harold Wickham. He's the territorial land agent." Jake kept his voice calm and steady. "I paid $5 for 500 acres, fair and square." To Jake's surprise, the woman laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. $5? "Mister, you've been swindled. This land was never for sale. I've got the deed to prove it," Jake said, slowly reaching into his vest pocket. The woman tensed, her rifle coming up slightly, but she relaxed when she saw he was only pulling out a folded paper. "My name is Isabella Rodriguez," she said, and Jake felt his stomach drop. "But everyone calls me Bella. This is my family's land. Has been for 3 generations. My grandfather received it as a land grant from the Mexican government, and my father worked it until the day he died." Jake stared at her, the deed suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds in his hand. "Rodriguez," the land agent said. The previous owner was named Miguel Rodriguez, said he had to leave town in a hurry. Bella's face darkened. "Miguel Rodriguez was my father, and he didn't leave town. He was murdered 3 months ago by claim jumpers who wanted our land. They burned our house in town and killed our cattle, trying to force us off our property." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Jake's mind, and he didn't like the picture they formed. "Miss Rodriguez, I think we've both been played for fools. That land agent sold me property that wasn't his to sell." Bella studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she lowered her rifle slightly. "You really didn't know? I swear on my mother's grave I had no idea. I was just looking for a fresh start, a place to build a life. If I'd known this land belonged to your family, I never would have bought it." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Bella lowered her rifle completely. "What are you going to do now?" Jake looked around at the beautiful valley, then back at the young woman who stood defending her family's legacy with nothing but courage and a rifle. "I reckon the first thing I need to do is figure out who's behind this scheme. Someone's trying to steal your land, and they used me to do it." "Why would you help me?" Bella asked suspiciously. "You could just ride away, pretend this never happened." Jake folded the deed and put it back in his pocket. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've got a feeling that whoever's behind this isn't going to stop with just one family." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. Bella's face went pale. "They're coming back," she whispered. Jake counted at least 6 riders approaching at a gallop, kicking up clouds of dust in the fading light. "Get inside," he told Bella, "and keep that rifle handy." The real enemy revealed. The riders thundered into the yard just as the last light of day was fading into purple twilight. Jake stood on the porch beside Bella, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. The lead rider was a big man with a black beard and cold eyes, wearing a badge that caught the moonlight. Behind him rode 5 other men, all armed and looking like trouble. Well, well, the bearded man called out, reining in his horse about 20 feet from the porch. Looks like we got ourselves a squatter problem, boys. I'm Sheriff Wade Garrett, the man continued, his voice carrying the authority of his office. And you, stranger, are trespassing on private property. Jake stepped forward slightly, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Sheriff, I'm Jake Morrison, and I've got a legal deed to this property, purchased from the Territorial Land Office just yesterday. Sheriff Garrett laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down Jake's spine. That's so? Well, Mr. Morrison, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. This land belongs to the Dragoon Valley Cattle Company, and they don't take kindly to trespassers. That's a lie. Bella stepped forward, her rifle held ready. This land has belonged to my family for 3 generations. My father died defending it. Your father died because he was a stubborn fool, Garrett said coldly. And if you don't clear out by tomorrow morning, you'll join him. Jake felt anger building in his chest. The pieces were all falling into place now, the too good to be true land deal, Wickham's nervous behavior, and now a corrupt sheriff working with cattle barons to steal family land. It was an old story in the West, but that didn't make it any less wrong. Sheriff, Jake said carefully, I paid good money for this land. If there's a dispute over ownership, shouldn't that be settled in court? Garrett's hand moved to rest on his gun. Out here, stranger, I am the court, and I'm telling you to move along before things get unpleasant. One of the other riders, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. Boss, why don't we just settle this now? Save everyone a lot of trouble. Patience, Scar, Garrett said. Mr. Morrison here seems like a reasonable man. I'm sure he'll see the wisdom in moving on. Jake looked at Bella, seeing the fear and determination warring in her dark eyes. He thought about his $5, about his dreams of a fresh start, about the easy thing to do. Then he thought about what was right. I'm afraid I can't do that, Sheriff, Jake said quietly. See, I've got a legal deed, and Miss Rodriguez here has an even better claim. Seems to me like this Dragoon Valley Cattle Company is trying to steal land that doesn't belong to them. The temperature in the yard seemed to drop 10 degrees. Garrett's face hardened, and his men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. That's a serious accusation, Morrison, Garrett said. You sure you want to make an enemy of me? I'm not looking for enemies, Jake replied. But I won't stand by and watch innocent people get robbed either. Bella moved closer to Jake, and he could feel her presence beside him like a warm flame in the growing darkness. You should know, Sheriff, she said, her voice steady despite the danger, that I've already sent word to the territorial governor about what happened to my father. There are people in Tucson who know about the Dragoon Valley Cattle Company and their method. Garrett's eyes flicked between Jake and Bella, calculating. Finally he smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. Well then, I guess we'll just have to make sure no one's left to tell tales, won't we? The sheriff's hand dropped toward his gun, but Jake was already moving. His Colt cleared leather in a smooth, practiced motion, and the sound of the hammer being cocked seemed unnaturally loud in the still air. I wouldn't, Jake said quietly. For a moment the tableau held, 6 men on horseback facing 2 people on a porch, everyone's hand near a weapon, everyone knowing that the next few seconds could determine who lived and who died. Then Garrett laughed and raised his hands. Easy there, Morrison. No need for gunplay. He gathered his reins. You've got until noon tomorrow to clear out. After that, well, accidents happen out here in the desert. Terrible shame when drifters just disappear. The sheriff wheeled his horse around and rode off into the darkness, his men following. But Jake knew they wouldn't go far. They'd be back, and next time they wouldn't bother with talk. Thank you, Bella said quietly once the sound of hoofbeats had faded. You didn't have to stand with me. Jake holstered his gun and turned to look at her. In the moonlight she was even more beautiful, but it was the courage in her eyes that truly took his breath away. Yes, I did, he said simply. It was the right thing to do. The fight for what's right. Jake and Bella spent the night preparing for the battle they knew was coming. They moved supplies into the cabin, checked their ammunition, and planned their defense. The adobe walls of the cabin were thick enough to stop most bullets, and the windows provided good fields of fire. But they were still just 2 people against at least 6, and those 6 had the law, corrupt though it was, on their side. As dawn broke over the Dragoon Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jake found himself standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the trail that led to town. Bella emerged from the cabin, her long hair braided back and her rifle in her hands. Any sign of, she asked. Not yet, but they'll come, Jake sipped his coffee, savoring what might be his last peaceful moment for a while. Tell me about your father. What kind of man was he? Bella's face softened. He was a good man, honest, hard-working, stubborn as a mule when he thought he was right. He came here from Mexico when he was young, married my mother, and built this ranch with his own 2 hands. When she died giving birth to me, he could have given up, gone back to his family in Sonora. Instead he stayed and raised me here, taught me to ride and shoot and think for myself. Sounds like a man worth fighting for, Jake said. He was, and this land, it's not just property to me, it's his legacy, his dreams, everything he worked for. I can't let them take it. Jake nodded. Understand, he'd felt the same way about his ranch in Texas, before the drought and the debts had taken it away. What about the territorial governor? You really send word to Tucson? Bella smiled grimly. I did, but help from Tucson is days away if it comes at all. We're on our own until then. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Jake counted 8 riders this time. Garrett had brought reinforcements. The sheriff rode at the head of the group, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Beside him rode a man Jake didn't recognize, well-dressed and sitting his horse like he owned the world. That's Marcus Thornton, Bella said quietly. He owns the Dragoon Valley Cattle Company. He's the one behind all this. Thornton was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who was used to getting his way. When the group stopped in the yard, he was the one who spoke. Miss Rodriguez, he called out in a cultured voice, I'm sorry it's come to this. Your father was a stubborn man, but I respected him. I'm prepared to offer you $500 for this property, more than fair compensation for what is, after all, just a small ranch. This land is not for sale, Bella replied firmly. Not for $500. Not for $5,000. It belongs to my family. Thornton sighed theatrically. I was afraid you'd say that, Sheriff Garrett. I believe these people are trespassing on my property. Perhaps you should arrest them. My pleasure, Mr. Thornton, Garrett said, his hand moving to his gun. Jake Morrison, Isabella Rodriguez, you're under arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace. On whose authority? Jake called out. I've got a legal deed to this property. A fraudulent deed, Thornton said smoothly, sold to you by a man who had no right to sell it. I'm afraid you've been the victim of a confidence game, Mr. Morrison. Jake had to admire the man's gall. Thornton was essentially admitting that Wickham had been working for him, selling land that didn't belong to either of them, and then using that illegal sale to justify stealing the property from its rightful owner. Seems to me, Jake said, that the only criminal here is the man who's trying to steal a family's land through murder and fraud. Thornton's face hardened. Sheriff, I grow tired of this conversation. Do your duty. Garrett drew his gun and his men followed suit. Come out with your hands up, or we'll come in and get you. Jake looked at Bella, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. What do you say, Miss Rodriguez? Feel like making a stand? I've been making a stand for 3 months, she replied. I'm not about to stop now. Then I guess we'd better get to work. The first shot came from one of Garrett's men, splintering the wooden post beside Jake's head. Jake and Bella dove for cover as bullets began flying. Jake rolled behind a water trough and returned fire, his Colt barking in the morning air. Bella had taken position at the cabin window, her rifle cracking steadily. The battle was fierce but brief. Jake's military training from his younger days served him well, and Bella proved to be an excellent shot. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Thornton's men were down, and the rest had taken cover behind their horses and the barn. This is your last chance, Garrett shouted. Surrender now, or we'll burn you out. Jake's answer was another shot that sent the sheriff diving for cover, but he knew their position was hopeless. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and Thornton's men could simply wait them out, or set fire to the cabin. That's when they heard it, the sound of many horses approaching at a gallop. Jake risked a look and saw a sight that made his heart leap. A troop of cavalry soldiers riding hard toward the ranch, their blue uniforms bright in the morning sun. At their head rode an officer with captain's bars on his shoulders. This is Captain